So hello everybody and welcome to this webinar from the eLearning Network, which today is presented by Rob Hubbard of LAS. Do you call yourself LAS or LAS?
Just LAS, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Apologies, I should have asked you that before we started recording. So today's topic is blended learning. As I've said in the chat briefly, make sure that you select all panelists and attendees so that everybody can read your messages. And we'll use the chat throughout with a couple of polls. And we are recording this. So let me just, without further ado, hand over to you, Rob.
Cool, thank you very much. So it's great to have a small but perfectly formed group here this morning. So as I mentioned, I'll be looking for input from you guys. So I always think whenever we're in one of these kind of sessions, it's a bit of a massive waste if the only person you hear from is the speaker. Because you can generally go and find that stuff out online, but I'll be looking for you all to contribute and help. So, so let me just share my screen. We'll be using Miro today for this. So let me get my chat up so I can see you all as well. There we are, cool. So if you can just confirm in the chat, let me know if you can see my screen. Yeah, I can see Piers can. Yeah, a few others. Great. Okay, wonderful. So the slightly provocative title, The Trouble with Blended Learning and How to Avoid It. Obviously, you're all here because you love blended learning. A lot of people kind of think it's a bit old hat, that it's, you know, of a particular kind of format, is perhaps past its prime. What we perceive, we have a lot of love for blended learning, but we notice that quite often it's not applied in the best way, and we think that's one of the reasons, perhaps the main reason, why it's perhaps not thought of as highly as it should be. You know, okay, it's not as cool and sexy maybe as augmented reality or VR or AI or any of those other modern sexy acronyms, but you know, a proper next generation blend can include that sexy stuff as well. But only where appropriate, only where it really helps. So I won't give a big intro to LAS. We'll kind of cover a bit more about who we are and what we do at the end. But the main thing about us is our projects basically exist in this space between learning and capability building, so helping people learn new stuff and improve their abilities. Very often we're part of a change enablement, a bigger change. So that might be organisation-wide changes that we help with, so digital transformation across, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, or down to a very specific change with a specific audience segment to change a very particular behaviour. And very often, well, always, in our projects, communications and engagement is really important. So in terms of the comms and engagement with the audience that sits around the actual learning content, the actual learning experiences that you build. And this in the centre here is really what we exist to do as an organisation and the kind of projects that excite us the most. So what I'd like to do first of all is just get from you all in chat. I'd like you to give me a definition of what blended learning means to you, please. So just type that into chat for me. So I'll just give you a moment to get your answers in. So Peter's completely new to blended, okay. So Nick is a mix of different learning interventions. So Joe, a mix of learning design theories put into practice via a mix of delivery methods. A mix of stuff really open, absolutely Piers. Mixture of various learning methods. Combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning, face-to-face and digital. Combination of many delivery methods. Yeah, so in Oliver's experience, it's been very hard to implement, but I love planning it. Well, I hope what you'll learn today, Oliver, will help you with that implementation. You get some really practical guidance here. Engaging formats of learning that have an impact and support all learning types, a mix of delivery methods. So absolutely, so we're in the right ballpark here. Absolutely. So the older definition of blended learning was that it must involve some form of in-person interaction with people. We don't believe that anymore because technology has moved on. There's so much more that we can do online in real time, and more ways that we can interact when we're not physically with each other. So for us, blended learning is quite a broad definition, and it's a combination of different forms and format of learning, but used in an efficient way to achieve the overall objectives for the project. So it's a mixture of approaches. We keep that really open. I mean, something that we found that there are a lot of people don't realise that there's 30 plus different forms of digital learning. So 34 that we've mapped, and of course many more forms of learning that you can do with people. So think of all the different kind of activities that you can do when you're physically together in a workshop, or together in an online experience like this where we can all communicate in real time. So really, in terms of our blend, in terms of the different learning experiences and ways that we can engage with our audience, there's probably like over 100 of them. There's a lot. So you need to know when to use what, so that you can be not just effective but also efficient. And that's really the heart of our next generation blended learning approach. So before we get into it, just a few kind of health warnings, a bit of a disclaimer really. So what we're not saying here, we're not saying that blended learning is the answer to every learning project. So nor would we say that of any learning approach or technology. It's very much about understanding your audience, understanding your project objectives, what you want to achieve as the organisation, what the audience want to achieve, and coming up with the best approach for doing that. So blended learning doesn't fit everything, but if blended learning is the right approach for your project, then we would certainly recommend our next generation blended learning approach. It doesn't remove the need for really strong learning experience designers. So it's a process that really anybody could follow, and they would come up with an effective learning experience if they knew a little bit about learning design. But what they wouldn't be able to do is pick the most efficient way of helping people achieve that level of performance. So, really strong learning experience designers, these guys know about those 30 plus forms of digital learning. They know when to use the different forms. They know also what's quick and easy to do and what takes more time. So a question there from Joan. So difference between learning designers, IDs, and learning experience designers. So learning designers and learning experience designers, for me, I use those terms interchangeably. That for me is the same thing. I view them as different to instructional designers though. And I think if you look up the sort of classical definition of instructional design, probably they are the same thing. But for me, there's an awful lot of baggage with the title instructional design. So it's usually thought of as the design of e-learning courses, instructional design. Whereas learning experience design, it broadens people's thinking. So a learning experience designer could equally well design a virtual classroom like this, or a learning support tool, something that people step through, or an e-learning module, or a scenario, or a learning app, or a website. So it's a much kind of broader kind of remit. That's how we perceive learning experience designers. Whereas for instructional designers, it's much more narrow. It's typically around the design of courses. So great question, Joe. Thank you. And in terms of next gen, so it's a really kind of logical approach. And in looking at the principles that we've based our thinking upon, you'll sort of see where the roots of it are as well. So all this gives you ammunition and really good reasons when you're using it with your subject matter experts and your stakeholders that help you justify why you're recommending taking the approach that you recommend. So it's really helpful in using that. That's certainly how we'd recommend that you use it. So we've got LAS, we've been around for 15 years, and we've taken a very deep interest in human beings in general and our audiences in particular that we're designing for. So we're very interested in things like psychology, in human behaviour, in cognitive science, in advertising, in game mechanics, in all of these different areas where we can see that there are replicable ways that behaviours can be changed. So we're very interested in all of those things, and we've based our thinking in general is based on all these things, but particularly next-gen blended learning. So we've got 6 principles here that we as a group today are going to investigate, learn about and generate ideas around. But I want to put you in the driving seat. So Joan, if you're able to open up our poll here, I'd like you to vote on which one of these principles you'd like to explore first. And just to warn you, I think today we'll probably get through 3 of them, so we won't get to do all 6. So which would you like to do first? And then we'll focus on that. So Joan, I guess you'll have to close
I'll share the results, Rob, in a minute. But half the people have voted now, so just give it another second or 2.
Cool.
There is currently a clear favourite though, which is social.
Oh, okay, very good.
Just a couple more people.
So I always like to put people in the driving seat in these kind of events, just so that we can better shape the kind of stuff that I'll cover with you, with what you're most interested in. So who's our winner, Joan? Social, yeah. 47%, wonderful. Okay, let's start with that one. So a lot of these principles are the kind of blindingly obvious, but often ignored principles that we're all aware of. But, we really like at LAS, we're not into complicated things or difficult things. We're into things which are kind of true and obvious and proven, but then we try and think quite deeply about how that might influence our work and what we do. So really that's the process that we're doing here. So something that we tend to forget is we human beings are social primates. So we live together in social groups. We always have done as we've evolved. We're incredibly good kind of picking up on social cues from other members of our group. If you look at this picture here, you could almost imagine a conversation between these chimps. There could be a learning conversation going on here. I mean, I even remember seeing on TV and nature programs, examples of other primates using tools and teaching younger primates to use the tools. So, fundamentally we are social as a species. But we're also absolutely, Peter, they're not afraid of COVID. It's not. I don't think it's jumped to other primates yet, has it? So yeah, they're laughing. The other primates are. But yeah, so as a social species, we're also naturally social learners, and that's one of the challenges that I've always had with the traditional e-learning module. So the traditional e-learning module, very attractive because it's like a thing. It's a defined thing, and it's a thing that you can work out how to produce pretty effectively, and you can make it look and feel pretty good. But unfortunately, what the effect that had was isolating our learners, and it's why, I think as an industry, we, for many years, and I do think it's better now, but for many years, we had a pretty bad reputation. I'd meet somebody in the pub and they'd ask me what I do. I'd say, I do digital learning, and they'd go, what, is that like e-learning? And I go, well, kind of. And they'd say, oh, it's that dreadful stuff on the learning management system, isn't it? And I used to get that for years. I get that less often now. I think people get that it's a bit more broad. But yeah, that isolation, learning in isolation, I think is just really unnatural. So this is where I now want you all to contribute. So I'd like you to put into the chat, taking into account this principle that we are social learners, what ideas do you have? What ideas can you share with how we could do that in the context of blended learning, in the context of a blend? So I'll just be quiet now for a minute and let you put your ideas into the chat. So how could we take account of this principle in our design of blended learning? So I can see some starting to come in there. So Peter, you've posed a question there. How can you stimulate social learning? But that's what we're looking for you to answer. What ideas do you have? Okay, wonderful. So let's start having a look through some of these. See if I can make my panel bigger. Ah, that's better. Cool. So peer learning in breakout rooms, Kahoot and other shared quiz options. So doing stuff in virtual classrooms, but where we can group people together into smaller groups. So Zoom has breakout rooms, a whole load of the other platforms do as well. So yes, some great ideas there. Providing opportunities to share ideas or thoughts, so ways that people can share their stuff back, so that could be in discussion groups, sealed private ones for the cohort, or more public, or it could be in the form of assignments that are reviewed by other people. So activities that involve working together in online classroom or student forum. Yeah, so there's some really good tools now. You'll probably already have stuff within your organisations that can support people in doing this. You should already have platforms. And Richard there, face-to-face workshop, why not? Absolutely. So we're not arguing against face-to-face training. It will be wonderful, and we all can get together again as we used to. And really for us, people coming together to learn in person with others, ideally one-to-one with someone who is a real expert and also a talented teacher of that and imparting of that knowledge. That really is the premium form of learning. And then coming below that is where it's kind of small groups working together. Yeah, I found it fascinating. We used to do lots of work with the University of Cambridge, who are number two in the world at the moment. I've just been reliably informed off camera. But the way that they achieve that is through really small tutorial groups. So they, and interestingly with COVID, they've just decided to completely stop doing all of their lectures, which is a great idea. Lectures are a fairly useless way of learning. A recording of a lecture would be a bit more useful, but nearly all learning at Cambridge happens in these really small tutorial groups of 3 or 4 people. Works really well. Support learning networks across the business, also support a social tool like Yammer for sharing, so getting a bit of social engagement going on there. So from Helen there, lots of opportunities for learners to complete activities together, to give each other feedback, trainer guides. The trainer guides rather than teachers. I think that's a lovely concept for the trainers. It's the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. I've just been learning about universal design for learning principles, actually, which is used in schools, which is a really inclusive way of designing learning experiences where the learner gets to self-select what's best for them. And that's the teacher there is very much the guide on the side rather than somebody just trying to teach. So encouraging interaction, lots of exploration for themselves. Action learning sets work great, group reflection, group work, all synchronous, but also forums, etc., which is more synchronous. Using Teams with interaction, so yeah, Microsoft Teams has really risen to the challenge of COVID, and recognising who in the org has subject matter expertise, and I guess finding ways to share that and then to socialise that with others. Action learning, Joan shouts out that again. Very easily done virtually. From Erna, to keep in line with picture and how our primal instincts are to be social. We love to sit around the fire and listen to our elders or to the people that have gone into the wild and come back with amazing stories about how they defeated the beast. That will not change. People will always be open to listen to others, learn from past experience, and also go out to hunt for themselves when they're ready. So Irina, that is a wonderful thought and concept. Would you like to come onto audio? It'd be great to hear from you, actually. So Joan, are you able to enable Irina's audio, please?
Hello, hiya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, loud and clear.
Brilliant. I've actually never used Zoom, which is a bit embarrassing.
Oh, that's all right.
Because we use Teams. So yeah, I've just thought of the primates that we're looking at, or the apes that we're looking at in the pictures. I'm thinking, well, some things will never change. We are humans, we learn socially. So whether we are remote, we learn digitally, it's still, the information still has to come from someone that has the knowledge to pass it over to to someone who needs the knowledge, if that makes sense. And how we do it has to be in a way that is engaging, it's exciting, is oh, and you went out and you did that. And in my world is, right, so you went into the communication plan, tell me more how you did it, how did you implement that? Or you went and recorded a video using Captivate, which is what we use. And then I'd go and tell my colleague how I did that. And we learn through Teams, we learn through Yammer, and all of the things that you have on the screen are just different ways of engaging, but engaging with people, you know. Things might change since very recently, maybe a week ago or just this week, we've learned about that artificial intelligence that can create language or text that is very close to the way humans speak. And maybe at one point, that will change and we will speak to machines. But until that becomes worldwide and accessible, we're still going to talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the storytelling element there as well in the points that you make, Irina, and that's picked up further down by Joan as well. I mean, storytelling is a really kind of natural form of learning and communication that we're all very comfortable with, from literally, as you say, Irina, where we used to sit around the fire and tell stories and pass knowledge down that way. And you know, you look at the early cave paintings, and those, you know, many of those seem to tell a story, don't they? So it's a form of learning that we're very comfortable with, and it's also something which can build empathy. And you know, as social learners, as a social species, you know, we want to connect to others, and being things that connect to us emotionally, we're much more likely to take notice of, because it's in our interest to be a strong social group and having those strong social ties. So there's some wonderful ideas that have come in there, whole load more as well. Just in the interest of time though, let's get on to another principle. So Joan, can you open up our poll again, please? And let's see which one people would like to venture and explore next. So just vote in the poll again for me. So obviously we've just done social. What's the next one that you'd like to look at?
So again, we've got a clear favourite emerging, which is good enough. Oh no, it's getting quite close between that and brain.
So Joan asked a question, or made a suggestion that I let you know how the post-it notes are magically appearing. I can share that it is magic, so it is actual magic is how they appear. So look, no hands. See, next time they start appearing, I'm going to put my hands up like this, so you can just see. So it's the AI technology that Irina mentioned. It's summarising what I'm saying and popping them on the post-it notes.
Is that long enough?
I think that's long enough. What's our winner? Let's see. Good enough. Okay. Wonderful. So, good enough. Thank you, Joan. It's very tempted to be, tempted by the shiny things, by the new technology, by the the fancy approaches, by the shiny red car on the left, which it would just be wonderful to use that as transportation to get somewhere. But in times of dwindling budgets and short attention span and increasing competition for our learners' attention, really you just want to give them what they need to get them where they need to get to. So sometimes good enough really is good enough. And actually, there's that wonderful cartoon I should find. There's the cartoon about UX, isn't there, where it's kind of what the designer wants to create. And there's like an amazing, like a spaceship. And then there's what the stakeholders think they want. And it's like a sports car. And then there's what the users actually need. And it's a skateboard. So that concept of, really understanding your users at depth and understanding the real challenges, the real problems that they face in regard to your particular project or your particular topic, and helping them to overcome that in the most efficient and human-centered way that you can. So not over-engineering things. It is tempting, you may get pressure sometimes from senior board members. Maybe somebody's read a really cool article on a plane, back when we used to fly on planes, about VR or something like that, and they get a bee in their bonnet about doing a project on it. In fact, I once talked talked ourselves out of what probably would have approached around about £100,000 worth of work to do a VR project, which a customer was very interested in. And I ran a workshop with them, and we kind of explored, what the problem was, or the opportunity that we were trying to help the audience with, and who the audience were, and what they really needed. And it wasn't a VR experience, it was actually something much simpler. It was more to do with communications and changing process. But yeah, really taking the time to identify when good enough is good enough. So thinking of this principle, you know what I'm going to ask you now. So in the chat, how can we apply this principle in the blended learning programs that we design? How can we apply this principle of good enough is good enough, not over-engineering things in the blended learning projects that we do? So what are your ideas? Please put them in the chat. Wonderful. So I'll start working through these now. Please keep typing. I do want us to harvest all these great ideas from you. So Mark says an effective learning needs analysis. Absolutely. I mean, if you're lucky, there'll be some level of analysis before you, begin working on your project. But sometimes that will be done without input from the users. And the key to success in all of our projects is really understanding the users at depth, and the best way that you can do them, of course, is by speaking to them. So if your learning needs analysis has been provided based on data and based on stakeholder views on things, we definitely recommend taking the time to speak to some of the users as well. So from Joan there, being clear on what you're trying to achieve and don't overscope what you're doing. Absolutely. Piers says don't wait for the greatest system to arrive. Yeah, I mean, salespeople are salespeople. They need to sell their product, so they get their bonus, and so they can, live their lifestyles. It's tempting for them to oversell their product, oversell their platform, oversell their content. As I mentioned earlier, there isn't a single solution that works everywhere, but yeah, being able to kind of get through that. Similar to Thomas's point there, don't get caught up in the next big thing. Actually evaluate its efficacy and relevance to your goals. And I love the KISS acronym, which for those that don't know is keep it simple, stupid, or simple and specific is perhaps the better way of doing it. But yeah, always kind of, we like to start with what's the simplest way that we can achieve as much of this project outcome as possible. And only if that's not sufficient do we kind of take the next step and look at, what would we add to this to kind of make it more effective, so that you're not starting at the expensive, complicated, time-intensive end of things. You're starting with good enough. We've got don't include too many apps, tech, etc., as it can be overwhelming and lead to a broken flow. Yeah, so yeah, I think for me, I'm very much led by what's right. Well, you'll see this in Next Gen shortly, but what's right for the audience. What are the level of skills that we want people to develop? What are the behaviour changes that we need to encourage, and kind of taking the lead from that. But yeah, I can definitely see the benefit in with some audiences not having lots of different forms of learning in the blend, but minimising that. So they, oh, I forgot to raise my hand. So I'm raising my hands now when we put the next one on. Thank you for pointing that out, Fiona. From Richard there, try to solve the problem caused by lack of knowledge or skills, not create a course. So absolutely, my hands up. Absolutely. So don't start with a single solution in mind. A course is one of many different solutions that can come up. And you need to kind of open your mind to begin with. So for Marina, do your analysis. What are we trying to achieve with this solution? Solve the problem. What is the actual issue? So really getting to the heart of it. From Ed there, being clear on what the desired change needs for the user group are, and align ideas and activities to that. So you can see how important it is to not necessarily take what you've been asked to do at face value. And this is a move from the learning and development or the e-learning team being kind of order takers that decide that are asked to produce a course because the business needs a course, so off you go and you produce a course, more to be more like an L&D consultant. So a lovely one there from Piers. So look for the minimum viable proposition rather than including everything. So this is, what's the minimum that you can do that will get you kind of 80% of the way there. And we're always, loads of our work is just around prioritization. What's the quick and easy stuff that we can do, and how much of the end result will that get us? And then kind of working from there on. From Mandy there, give the theory, apply it with a good case scenario example and discuss it with others. Yeah, so, just letting people apply their learning and looking at efficient ways that we can let them do that. And very often it's just through discussion with others, perhaps our action learning as we talked earlier on. From Helen, be realistic about what your audience's network can handle, will allow. So public sector are heavily restricted and the tech is often slow. Yeah, there was a great session that I saw at the Summer Forum from a lady that worked for, was it Southend or Southwark Borough Council, I think it was, talking about how they'd responded to COVID. And of course, many people in those kind of situations have had to and been encouraged to adopt the bring your own device approach as well. So yeah, I think one of the positive things that may come out of the pandemic is that people are more open to opening up the technology people access things from. So for Rena, I know it's hard, but learn to say no, absolutely. Giving really good reasons and hopefully trying to educate people a bit and win them round to your way of thinking with evidence, of course, and sensitive discussion with them and the data that you've gathered from your audiences. So Oliver's got there, good enough can also mean a minimum viable product that you can iterate afterwards in a sort of agile way and develop in an ongoing process. So Oliver, it'd be wonderful if we could hear from you actually, that would be great. I mean, this is something that's close to my heart, but quite difficult to achieve in practice. So I wonder if you've had experience of this, if you'd like to tell us a bit more about that, please.
Yeah, actually, I'll try and make it short because I can tend to ramble.
Okay.
In short, it was about 2008 actually, I worked in an American startup company in Beijing, and they built like a VoIP platform integrated with live online teachers and online lesson content and lessons. But then we wanted to work with some players in the industry doing Cambridge examinations and make that a blended solution. And I would say one of the mistakes we perhaps made, or if you like, my boss made, is the system became so, it was actually fantastic, but it was impossible to find anyone to properly partner with it because it interfered with their own, not their own curriculum, but their own actually administrational procedures. And I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
So I think from what you're saying, perhaps what would have been better was to create an MVP of the approach rather than trying to take something to market.
That was already quite huge, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, which was already perhaps a bit over-engineered and a bit inflexible, perhaps taking something which took maybe 25% or 1/10 of the percent to do as a means to gather information from people and see what's going to work.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly why I mentioned the MVP thing, because I think it was a typical sort of ambitious mistake we perhaps made. Yeah. And everyone loved the system, but they were like, how are we going to incorporate this with our existing classes? So yeah, to not ramble too much, it was frustrating.
So Mark's just asked MVP, minimum viable product, Mark. So it's basically what's the minimum that we can do that's going to be just good enough to help people. And the idea of an MVP, a minimum viable product, is you do a very basic first version, but you get feedback from actual users very, very rapidly, and then you iterate it and take a few steps. So it's a really robust approach to take. It works very well. It's very difficult to do as an external agency. I think you'll have much more success doing this as an internal team. With an external agency, we've had people who've talked to us about agile ways of working and MVPs, and when we've actually shown them, okay, well, you do get that it's going to be this sort of level of something that we're going to release and gather feedback on. Usually they'll go, it's not actually going to look like that, is it? I mean, it is going to look really nice, isn't it? And it is going to have more functionality, and it is going to do this and do that. And very quickly, it's not an MVP because they're nervous about something going on out with their name on it that doesn't look and feel amazing. Whereas I think an internal team, you've got a bit more scope for doing that and being able to iterate it. So just in the interest of time, let's just do one more very quickly. So Joan, if we can have our poll up again, let's do one more principle, and we'll just quickly gather people's ideas. Great, so we've had social and good enough. Which one of the remaining 4 would you like to look at next? We'll do this one pretty quickly.
Brain is currently out front.
Brain, okay. All right.
Yeah, I think.
It's still our winner. Let's have a look.
Yep.
There we are. Brains out front. Okay, wonderful. So, one sized. Here we are. So, another stating the blindingly obvious. We don't have hard drives in our skulls. We have creative, empathic, emotive brains. Unfortunately, a lot of learning is designed with the mistaken assumption that we do have a hard drive in our minds. So very often content is overloaded. There's too much for people to take in. There's too much information that we expect them to learn. And even worse than that, we can expect them that they'll just go through it once and they'll just magically get it. And if they don't, well, that's the fault of the learning design. Oh, it's not been engaging enough. We should have used more, more bright colours. And, I told you we should have had those dancing penguins in the video. That would have got people's attention. But actually, it's because we're using the brain in the wrong way. If you want people to be able to access vast amounts of information really, really rapidly with a virtually zero margin for error, use one of these things. Or use a tablet, or use a laptop, or use whatever, because those are incredibly good at storing and recalling information. The human brain, even the mere act of recalling a memory, changes the memory. So over time, your actual memories change. They don't just sit in your brain in a discrete location and stay the same forevermore. They get remixed when you recall them to kind of try to paint you in the most positive light. So human memory is really not to be trusted. Eyewitness accounts, very easy to influence. The sort of Derren Brown type stuff that he does, all of that is based on this thinking. So what I'd like you to do now is let's just capture your ideas again. Same thing into the chat. We won't go through them this time because I want enough time for next gen blended learning, but let's capture the ideas from you. So how can we make use of the creative, empathic, connective human brains that we have, use them for those in a blend rather than using them like a hard drive? So please put your ideas in the chat for us. So we've got, I'll just whiz through these ones very quickly, but we've got here, so using really good imagery because it helps us recall things. To understand the difference between different approaches to learning design, cognitive, constructivist, social, behavioural, etc. Task-based activities, building emotion into design, storytelling gets a shout out again, making the content relatable, setting up a local learning group in your hub. I thought that said pub then, you can see where my mind's going. It's nearly the weekend. Practical activities, interactive activities. So there's loads of great ideas here. I can, what we'll do, we'll see if, we'll publish these afterwards. We're capturing a few of them with my magic no hands technology there. This is Miro, by the way, that we're using. It's like a big interactive whiteboard thing. But there's loads of great ideas there. We'll capture some more of these from the chat. We'll add a few more to this particular one, and then we'll share slides with this. after the event. So wonderful. Thank you all for all those brilliant ideas. I'll certainly be making use of some of them. And just to share, you know, of the sort of catalyst for next generation blended learning is this big pitfall that many people fall into in blended learning design, is to start with the content. And it sounds really logical. So what is it that you need to teach people? Oh, it's all this stuff. And then you'll go through the content and say, well, that would make a really nice video, and that would make a really cool animation. This will be a great learning game, and oh, this can be an infographic. And then you create all of those things, and you create a great video and a great animation and a really cool learning game and a great infographic. And the users, the learners, they like it. You know, they're good assets. They're enjoyable. They're engaging to people. But, you know, what if the stuff that you've been teaching in the learning game actually isn't a skill that people really need to learn? Or maybe it is a skill, but it's not one of the really high impact skills. So you've spent all that time and effort, and even worse, the learner's time and attention on learning something which isn't really going to be of benefit to them. You know, maybe that really wonderful video that you've created, that great animation, okay, you're kind of teaching people the principles, but maybe they're not the most powerful principles that you want people to use. So, you know, as I mentioned before, we're really big at LAS on prioritization. And really that's what we do here with next generation blended learning. So I'm going to zoom into these different areas. So you don't need to read it all yet. We'll go around each of them in turn. But to take you through it, when there is a project that we're undertaking and it's blended learning, we look at 4 different aspects of it. So we look at the knowledge that we want people to have access to. We look at the skills that we want people to develop. We look at the behaviours that we want people to start evidencing, and the attitudes that we want to influence, that we want people to adopt. And then we subdivide each of these further. So we divide the knowledge that we want people to have access to into recall. So this is what we want people to hold in their heads and instantly recall, and it's not okay for them to look it up in just a few seconds from their phone or computer or whatever. So it needs to be there. And then in the course of the blend, we cover that multiple times in multiple ways to give people the most opportunity to retain and be able to recall that information. The rest of the material, the majority of the material usually, is refer. It is okay for people to look it up in just a few seconds. So we make that really easy for them to get to. So it could go into, well, it needs to be something they can search and something they can browse. So that would go into, at a basic level, could be a document, could be a PDF, could be web pages, could be a little knowledge app on their phone, something like that. What you're not doing is trying to dress up the refer content and find ways to make it engaging. You know, instead what you're doing is focusing people's attention on this small amount of knowledge that you want them to have instant access to. You're covering that really thoroughly. So we're focusing our development time and budget, and most importantly, our learners' limited time and attention on the stuff that's going to have the most impact for them. How do you know which of these it should be? Yeah, your stakeholders will have a view, and your users will have a view, but very importantly, people that have just been through whatever the equivalent learning experience of this is will have a view as well. So by doing a bit of upfront research, you'll get a really clear view of this. We say to people the recall stuff should be 10 to 15%. There's no science there. What we want people to understand is you need to minimize it, because it's so difficult to get anything into short-term memory, let alone long-term memory. So that's how we treat knowledge. And I'll just move through these each in turn, and we'll then take questions on it as a whole and individually. So we'll cover all of that off. The skills we divide into high-risk skills and low-risk skills. So high risk is where there's a monetary, reputational, or physical risk to the individual or the organisation. So note that we're including the individual here as well. This is stuff that you really don't want people to get wrong. So when you're coming together physically in a classroom or in real time online, these are your role plays, these are the practice activities people are doing. If you're building things digitally because your audience is big, or maybe it's something you want people to practice tens of times, hundreds of times, not just like 3 or 4, these are your digital simulations, advanced digital scenarios and learning games. So all forms of learning that encourage learning through trial and error and experimentation. Low risk skills add value, but they're not super critical. So these are usually covered with either simple online activities, things you're not spending a lot of development time and budget on, or offline activities people can try with their colleagues, try with a customer, try at home. So again, we're focusing our development time and budget and our learners' limited attention on the stuff that's going to bring the most impact for them. And then behaviours and attitudes. So we've had quite a lot of success in changing people's behaviours over the years because we take a real human-centred approach to our projects. And we've also had a reasonable amount of success in influencing people's attitudes. And with both of these, some will be harder to change than others. And whether it's hard or easy to change will depend on who your audience is, where they are in terms of, what's their mindset around this topic and what else is going on, what's the context, what's the environment that they're in. We will, look and try and make a judgment on which behaviours and attitudes are going to be hard to influence and which are going to be more easy. Now, both of these go into the same two places, but the emphasis is different with each. So they go into primarily for behaviours, the overall design of the blend itself, so the personality of the blend. So as an example, in a recent project, the one, in fact, if you attended the previous one I did on our BBC project for Becoming Blended, something that the audience were nervous about was using technology in their blends. They were learning, the BBC have adopted next gen blended learning, and the trainers were nervous about using technology. So we made it feel quite playful. So in terms of the choice of the colours, the written language, the illustrations, how we were in the videos, how we facilitated it, the activities that we did, we made it feel playful, that it was okay to try stuff out. Sometimes it didn't work. So that went into the overall personality of the blend. The other place that behaviours go are into the communication and engagement campaign that fits around this project that you're doing, but to a lesser extent. They're more evident in the design of the blend itself. Attitudes we work into those same two places, but the emphasis is shifted. So the attitudes we primarily go into the comms engagement campaign, and they are evidenced but less explicit in the overall design of the blend itself, the personality of it. So that's how the four areas sit together. In terms of how you actually use it, you literally, having done your user research and your project research, you create a mind map with nodes for these, and you go through the material and you literally drop it against the relevant nodes. What's the recall knowledge, the holding the head stuff, what's the refer, it's okay to look up, what are the high and low risk skills, hard to change, easy to change behaviours, and hard to adopt and easy to adopt attitudes. And what you get very quickly in a few hours work is you see how difficult this project is going to be. So if you look at this and you've got loads of recall stuff, there's loads that you really need people to hold in their heads, and you've got a lot of high risk skills and not a lot of low risk, and there's not much refer, and there's some tricky behaviours and attitudes to adopt, that's going to be a project which to do well for that audience, you're going to have to invest in. You're going to have to spend a fair whack of money on, invest a fair amount of time in doing, and do it well. But equally, if you do that activity and you find, well, actually, there's not much people need to recall. Most of it is refer. There's only one high-risk skill. Most of it's low risk. And actually, they're pretty open to the change and they've got the right attitudes. That's a project that you're probably not going to need to spend a huge amount of money on, a huge amount of budget. So by taking that step, following that process, it allows you to do that prioritization. So you're not spending, large amounts of money building a really cool learning game or a wonderful simulation or whatever that's teaching a low risk skill, or working really hard to help people remember something which actually they only need to look it up when they need it. So this will give you the prioritization. So I'm just going to cover off a few of the questions that we've got here. So are there any questions that have come in from the chat? Let's have a look here. If you have any questions now, please post them in the chat. I can cover those off. And so Jones made a comment there. I guess it helps you to identify what's good enough. Absolutely. So it stops you from over-engineering, Joe. Yeah, absolutely. From Ed there, so skills, could you also look at them from a reward basis as opposed to risk? High reward opportunity. from that skill being well honed. Absolutely, yeah. So, high risk or high reward. The other thing about the skills is, whereas the recall and refer is more of an either-or state, for the skills, of course, it's more of a continuum. So you'll have skills, some that will be more high risk or high reward, and others that will be more in the middle or towards the lower end of the spectrum. But it's still helping you do that prioritization. So yeah, great point there. Irina there, let go of the closed book exam attitude, where we think people need to be able to hold everything in the manual as if they can never open one themselves. Yeah, absolutely. So instead of expecting everyone to remember all of this stuff, we're being really kind of tailored there. So that really helps. So any further questions from anybody? So we've got a point there from Oliver. It's also a case of prioritizing what activities or interactions or tasks to make more communicative and task-based, and which to actually make more of a succinct information sharing activity. Absolutely. Otherwise, a lot of time can be wasted on things that have lesser priority in terms of the learning goals. No, you didn't express that poorly, Oliver. That's exactly bang on. Absolutely bang on.
A quick thought from me, Rob. What area in your grid have you found most challenging? Any particular examples where you've really struggled to make it work?
Do you mean out of kind of knowledge, skills, behaviours and attitudes, or topics that we've tackled, or?
Well, I'm thinking I like the way you've divided it all up. It's a way I would use myself. But I'm just wondering, are there particular examples where you've really struggled?
Where you do the research and you find that the behaviours that you want people to adopt, there are some pretty substantial blockers there. So a blocker might be, for example, a work in practice, or another blocker might be the technology that people have access to. So those are pretty difficult things for you to influence from your learning design project. So, where we come up against those, or sometimes attitudinal problems. We all work in very complex work environments. There's always lots of initiatives and change and things going on. And when you identify those blockers, that can be really tough. But the fact that you've spotted them is only going to help. So being able to flag those up, quite often using this process, will kick off activities in other parts of the business. So if people really are serious about achieving the overall outcome for the project, then there's other things besides the design of the blend that need to be done. So yeah, that can be challenging, but at least you've got visibility of what those issues are. So Oliver's a bit unsure about what behaviours really means or covers. Knowledge, of course, is what people do. Skill is something, knowledge is what people know. Skill is something that people can learn to do. A behaviour is something that they will then consistently do over time. So you may have taught somebody a skill and you want them to, they've learned the skill, but then the behaviour is getting them to consistently use the skill over time. So I hope that's helped, Oliver. From Richard there, so how does motivating to learn fit in? How to get them to change from the sticky status quo? So there is a kind of user research piece that goes before this. Absolutely learning more about your audience and what their motivations are. All of that feeds into particularly the behaviours and the attitudes part of this. So we're very interested in finding particular levers that can help us with the changes that we're trying to bring about. And really what we like most are not the big kind of sledgehammer type massive change, huge, expensive, tricky thing to do, but rather more the kind of small levers, powerful levers in specific places. So a good example of that would be seeking out and using champions within a program and using those to be change agents, and they're modeling the right kind of attitudes and they're living the right behaviors and they're visible within the business. You can do a lot with them, and other levers around, as I mentioned, the changes to the stuff outside of the project, changes to working practices or lines of communication or lines of reporting. All of that helps. So from peers there, commission or bonus structures can conflict with desired behaviours. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really interesting approach. If you were using this for a sales training, if you designed a highly social learning experience for sales training, but the salespeople are You know, they get their bonuses based on how much they sell, and maybe they get an additional bonus for being the top salesperson in the area. You know, so that's going to kind of push against, well, why would they want to share all of their tips for what makes them really successful? So, you know, it really is understanding the audience at depth, the behaviours that you want to influence, and also the things that might be blockers to those, the change enablers or the change blockers. So, yeah, as I mentioned, if you remember those 3 cogs, you know, that's we consider all of those. And so from Mandy there, what we do is design resources to bridge the gap between self-study from a book and pass a 3-hour exam. Quite challenging. Students are motivated though. It's just retaining the knowledge and get to grips with answering questions correctly. I mean, we've used this a great deal in a commercial situation. I should add, like, lots of our customers have used this. I mentioned the BBC. We've used it on other projects with big pharma companies, stuff with the LPI, stuff with big brewers. And people now are starting to use this. We've made this freely available because you know, we know it works. It is really helpful to people, and the better we are as an industry, you know, the better for all of us, really. But we're out of time now. But I mean, just the kinds of stuff that LAS do. We do a load of free stuff. So next generation blended learning, that's free for you guys to pick up from this and start using themselves. We're also doing free 30-minute consultations to get people started with it. So, you know, you can have a bit more of my time for that if you'd like to. Our knowledge tree is our mailer, so that shares our kind of latest thinking on things. That's right up to the minute. We run a free learning experience design course. So next gen blended is covered as part of that, but it's kind of the level above that we're covering in that. We just take donations for a designated charity in each cohort. Next one's in October. And, you know, I mentioned those 30 plus forms of digital learning. We've made a tool available to people where you can basically get a short list of those for your project called the Digital Learning Diagnostic. So you can get all of those from our website, so las-hq.com. Occasionally people pay us for things as well. So we design and build all kinds of stuff, so content, loads of blends, as you'd expect, platforms and games, and we provide consultancy and support as well. So yeah, well, thanks everybody for your contribution and for all your brilliant ideas, which we'll add to this. We'll do a PDF version of what you've seen today and share that with you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Very interesting session, very engaging, very participatory. And it's helpful to have the links there. Do you, is just your website you want to share, or any email?
Yes, so, well, yep, so that's my email details, and LinkedIn, Twitter I'm less active on because I find it irritating, as we were discussing earlier, Joan, and the website is just las-hq.com.
Perfect.
So yeah, I hope you found something useful there that you can take away and will help you in your projects. And yeah, thanks everyone for being so involved.
Thank you. And then just to say that I was just going to, can you stop? Oh, here we go. I'll stop your share. There we go. Yeah. So thanks again, Rob. Just to say that we've recorded this, and the recording will be up on our YouTube channel shortly, along with a number of other recordings that we've been doing. And check out the website for upcoming events. We're having a bit of a holiday in August, no more webinars during August. There will be a newsletter. And if you haven't signed up for that already, then just go to our website, elearningnetwork.org. So thanks again. We'll stop the recording now and close it down.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.